You're now listening to the Adiel Gorel Show. Each episode, I'll bring you the latest news from my discussions with top health and wellness experts so that you can bring yourself into better health. Today, on the Adiel Gorel Show.
With this, dementia is not a death sentence. And what I have to tell you is I do see people when they back off and they pick and choose what they're going to do and they kind of don't do the whole program, they start backsliding. They don't do as well.
Hey everybody, it's really good to be here with you again today. It's always exciting to have Dr. Kat Toups on the show. Kat was on our television show, Life 201. We had an interview with her. She has a chapter in the book, Life 201. And Kat is always on the cutting edge of dementia research, a subject that a lot of people want to know about and are scared of. So Kat, welcome to the show.
Hi, Adiel. Thanks so much for having me.
So, if I understand correctly, there's some new research that you want to share with us.
Yes, exactly.
You want to jump right into it?
Sure, let's do that. While I work on sharing the screen, I'll give you a little prelude here. Let's see. Are you able to see those slides?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, let me just start by saying that the message that I always like to start with is that dementia is not a death sentence, that it's preventable and treatable if we can find and correct the underlying causes. So it doesn't just happen for some mysterious reason. It's not just your genetics. We have equal number of people that don't have the Alzheimer's gene that are getting Alzheimer's these days, but for both groups of people, it's happening for reasons. And so our job becomes to search out all of the different reasons that are causing the brain to degenerate and stop those things from harming the brain, and then do various things to utilize neuroplasticity to help the brain regenerate back again. So my biggest message that I like to always start and end with is dementia is not a death sentence. We need to understand that it can be treatable just like other medical conditions. So I'd like to tell you about a clinical trial that we just had published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease in the August edition that I worked on with Dr. Dale Bredesen, Dr. Anne Hathaway, and Dr. Deborah Gordon. And this is a prospective clinical trial with 25 patients. We accepted patients with both MCI, which is mild cognitive impairment, or early dementia. So if people had moderate dementia, though we can definitely help people with moderate dementia, the trial was designed for MCI and early dementia. And in order to get into the trial, we had certain cutoffs with scores. So we used a neuropsych battery.
If you can explain what the word prospective means in this context.
Sure. A prospective means looking ahead. So a retrospective trial would be looking back at information that already happened, but a prospective clinical trial means we have a hypothesis and a thesis, and we're collecting data to see if we can meet those benchmarks. And of course, the goal of our study was to show that we could reverse cognitive decline. And by the way, it's called the Four Winds clinical trial. It was sponsored by a private donor whose foundation was called Four Winds. So that's why we called it the Four Winds trial. So to get into the trial, we did a battery called a CNS Vital Signs, which is a big neuropsych battery that can be done online. And people had to have impairment in that. And then we did the MoCA, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment Scale. And that's a standard rating scale that's done with cognitive decline and dementia. And we accepted people whose scores were 19 and above. This was a 9-month trial. So we only had 9 months. We worked as fast as we could, but I'll show you in just a moment the data that we got. But even at the 3-month mark, we had statistically relevant separation of our cognitive markers. So all of the patients in the trial were treated using an individualized precision medicine or functional medicine approach, which really means we tested everything in these patients, and then each patient had a different treatment depending on what came up in their testing and their presentation and their risk factors. We repeated the cognitive testing, the MoCA and the CNS vital signs every 3 months. So I'll be showing you that data. And
can you explain what MoCA and CNSVS are?
Yes, so the MoCA was on the previous slide, but
I'm sorry. I'm slow, you know.
No, I'm glad you asked those questions, because it's true that I can take things for granted that not everyone knows. So it's really great for you to ask me that. So the MoCA is the Montreal Cognitive Assessment Scale. That's what it stands for. And that's a standardized rating scale that looks at different domains of memory. There's a trail making, and you draw a clock, and you have to draw a cube, and you have to learn 5 words and then remember those words later. And there's, things with auditory cues and visual cues. So it's a battery of tests that we get a score. And the score on that, the range is 0 to 30. So 30 is normal. Really 28 to 30 is normal, and 26 to 30 is probably normal for some people. So people had to have impairment in that rating scale to get into this study. And the CNSVS stands for CNS vital signs, and CNS stands for central nervous system. So CNSVS is it's a neuropsychiatric battery. So sometimes people will go and have neuropsych testing. It can be a multi-hour battery that looks at all different domains of functioning of their brain. This CNSVS is a beautiful, very well validated rating system now that's used in a lot of clinical trials and used in practice as well, that can be done online, and it can be done in 1 hour. So we use that to track how impaired people were and how much better they got in the study. And then we also looked at a caregiver rating scale, the AQ21, and then the AQ change. And so sometimes people's caregivers would say, no, my spouse doesn't have a problem. So even if they were testing as a problem, in order to come into the study, we did have to have they weren't really caregivers, so they're more like study partners, but it's called a caregiver rating scale. So we also corroborated how their partner in the study thought they were doing. And finally, one of the things that I'll show you in my slides that we were really amazed to find, we did MRI studies on everyone at the beginning and the end, and we used a special program now that's called a NeuroQuant. And NeuroQuant is very exciting in my world, because NeuroQuant gives us a report on every structure in the brain and tells us the volume of that. So we know with dementia that one of the things that starts to degenerate first is the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is our memory center. So basically we can look at the volume of the hippocampus and say, this is 2 standard deviations below the average. Well, this person's in trouble, right? So the NeuroQuant give us a nice printout of the volumes of all the structures in the brain. And I'll show you in just a minute that not only did we have changes in clinically in how people did, which is of course the most important thing, do we improve their functioning, but we had changes in all of these rating scales, and we even had changes in their head scans. So that to me was a big surprise, that we could change their head scans in 9 months' time. So a little summary of what we did, the study procedures. First was the diet. Diet, of course, as you know, Adiel, is the foundation of our health, right? What are we eating and how are we fueling our body? So in our study, we required that all patients use a ketogenic diet and get into at least mild ketosis. And one thing that we know about a ketogenic diet is what we know with aging, and especially with dementia, people don't seem to utilize sugar very well as fuel. So our bodies can use sugar or they can use fat to fuel everything in the body. And so as people start aging and they have problems with their blood sugar control and their lipids, they sometimes get into trouble utilizing carbs and sugar for fuel. So if we can shift them into a ketosis state where they're burning fat instead of the sugar and carbs, sometimes what we see is a enhanced clarity of the brain. We know that ketosis can help the brain. It's been used for a century for kids with intractable seizures. And now there's a growing body of evidence that it can be helpful for psychiatric conditions, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and certainly it's been useful for just enhancing the clarity of people's thinking. So we did require that people used a ketogenic diet. Of course, we had people eat a whole foods diet. It was kind of a paleo type diet. We asked them to basically eliminate all their grains and dairy because those are both inflammatory foods, eat a lot of vegetables, a lot of healthy fats, and small amounts of free range meat, chicken, fish. And we utilize time restricted eating. So it's been shown that if you compress your calories down to a limited number of hours per day, that you'll actually live longer. And it also helps with a lot of the metabolic factors like the lipids and the blood sugar. And of course, all of those things really affect the brain, and they're big factors with dementia. So we asked our patients to restrict their eating window to 8 to 12 hours a day. And what the people did 12 hours, as they got more and used to it, they were make that window shorter and shorter, them to eating a couple hours before bedtime. Some of the other things that we did in the study, we were optimizing the sleep. And of course, sleep is sleep is when our brain detoxifies. So if we're not sleeping sufficiently, sleeping well, and sleeping enough hours, we're cheating our brain of its detoxification. So we did things to assess that and optimize that. Of course, we check everybody for sleep apnea. And that is something that many times people would say, well, I don't snore, but we would still turn up sleep apnea. So I really encourage people to, if you're having sleep problems, certainly to get your sleep apnea checked. And these days it's so much easier to check for sleep apnea. Before the last couple of years, you had to go into a sleep lab and get hooked up to wires and stay overnight. But there's really nice home tests that the sleep labs can now send you home with, and it's a lot easier and more comfortable. Exercise, of course, is a hallmark of helping the brain, and we know that exercise helps to increase our BDNF, which stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And neurotrophic means it's helping the health of the neurons. So if we increase BDNF, we can make new connections in our brain, and exercise is one of the easiest ways to do that. So we had all our patients exercising or moving 6 days a week was the requirement. And they did a combination of strength and balance training, aerobics, and also HIIT, or high intensity interval training, which is where you just go all out for, say, 1 minute or 2 minutes. And there's a lot of data. People want to Google HIIT, but even doing 1 minute a couple times a week can actually change all of the metabolic factors for people. So it's definitely a thing worthwhile incorporating. We had people doing brain training 6 days a week, and we used the program Brain HQ. And Brain HQ is something that you can purchase, and you can do it on your computer, your cell phone, your iPad. And we had people doing, I believe, 12 minutes a day on the Brain HQ. And Brain HQ trains your brain on a lot of different domains of functioning, and it gets harder. So as you get better, it gets harder. So and that was interesting. We were able to track the progress of our patients and how they were improving their levels on Brain HQ. And I would say, I'm trying to recall, I think the average improvement we had was somewhere between 21 to 24% on people's Brain HQ. That wasn't one of the markers that we we're following specifically, but we definitely saw improvement with that. And then we incorporated a mindfulness or stress reduction component to the study. We know that stress can impair our brain, depression can impair our brain. And so what we utilized was a program called Heart Math. Any kind of mindfulness technique can help your brain, meditation, Qigong, Tai Chi, nature walks without your cell phone, just, turning off your brain and coming into your body. But we needed a standardized program that we could have everybody doing the same thing. So we chose Heart Math, which is a very elegant program they have research data for more than 20 years now showing that it can reduce stress and improve people's functioning. And it's a simple little program. Basically, it's kind of synchronizes your breathing with your heart rate variability, and it just tells you to breathe in and breathe out while it's synchronizing those things, and tells you to think of someone you love. And when you think of someone you love, it releases all of these beautiful hormones like oxytocin, and that can lower people's stress response. So that was a component. And we also looked at the dental health. There's an increasing body of data showing that the infections happening in our mouth track right up into our brain and activate the immune system in the brain. And that's leading to some of the amyloid that is causing problems for people with dementia. So we had a donation from the Biocidin company that allowed us to use their dental Cidin toothpaste and oral rinse solution. And I will tell you that I had patients that didn't have any periodontal disease or gum disease, but they would come back and say, oh, my dentist or my hygienist wanted to know what I was doing because my mouth looked so good. So that was a help. And I will tell you, in our upcoming study, we're going further with the dental health. Now there are measurements that we can get a test to have people test their oral flora, and it will tell us if they have the strains that are high risk for dementia, and also the strains in your mouth also affect the heart, so it's correlated with heart disease. So we'll be able to measure that, and we'll also be doing as needed cone beam CAT scans to look for hidden infections. Okay, let me go a little faster here. We had a support team, and this is what really, really helped our patients to do well. We like, in my line of work, to, get people to work with a nutritionist or a health coach if possible, but this was a Cadillac approach. Each patient had a nutritionist, they had a health coach, and the health coach in the first month went every week to the patient's home so they could look for hazards in the home, help the patients look in their cupboards and see what they were eating. Were there toxic things in the house, like, fragrances that might cause problems. And then each patient had an exercise coach, and the exercise coach helped to, assess where they were in their strength and their exercise programs, and then individualize a program to get each patient up to speed. And I will tell you, I had one patient in my study, he'd never exercised a day in his life. His only exercise, he told me, was walking a small dog. But by the end of the study, that patient loved exercising, and he told me he went on a trip to celebrate his wedding anniversary, and he went ocean kayaking in Monterey. And I will tell you that you have to be in good shape to do ocean kayaking. It's very strenuous. So it was just thrilling to see people. I had one guy come in with a walker, and after the first 3 months, he could walk with no walker. The exercise was definitely a help. And I would encourage people, if you haven't been exercising, that it might be a reasonable investment to have a few sessions with an exercise coach. Especially look for one that is experienced working with older people, because some of them are more geared toward younger athletes, but we had some good ones to work with our patients. And then, of course, they had a study partner, their spouse or an adult child, or someone ideally that lived with them that could give us reports on how they were doing. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but this goes through all the various things that we tested besides the cognitive testing. These are important things that affect the brain. So we were looking and correcting all these, their nutrient levels, their omega-3 fatty acids. We looked for heavy metals. We looked at all of their metabolic factors, their lipids, their blood sugar. We looked for autoimmune problems, immune markers, and that's a big cause of problems for the brain. We looked at their hormones and we optimized all their hormones. It was a requirement that people had to be able and eligible to take hormone replacement. And we do really believe that optimizing those hormones, we have receptors in our brain for estrogen, testosterone, progesterone. Both men and women have all of these receptors. And we really weren't meant to live much past menopause and andropause until the last century, but now we can live a third of our life past that. And if we don't have our hormones, studies have definitely shown that the brain degenerates much faster. We looked at infections, and infections are something else that I think people are missing. And I believe that COVID now has taught us a lot about the role of infections in the brain and what's happening to people developing brain fog and memory problems and even dementia from COVID. But we look at all kinds of infections. We particularly look at Lyme disease and the tick-borne infections because many of those like to live in the brain. We look for herpes viruses, Epstein-Barr virus, cytomegalovirus, so a big battery of infection testing. We looked at mycotoxin levels. That's mold. Mold makes mycotoxins, and not all mold causes problems, but there are certain types of mold that are very, very toxic for the brain. We looked at people's chemical toxin burden, and some people just don't detoxify well, and you'll see very high levels of lots of chemicals, and you'll see other people that haven't accumulated that much. But if you're a poor detoxifier, then that's something we need to help with. We did have people do home mold testing. We did nasal testing for nasal infections. We did a comprehensive stool analysis. In functional medicine, working with the gut is pretty foundational. The gut is the root of our immune system. And if the gut and the GI functioning is not healthy, nothing else in the body is going to be healthy. And then we did a big genetics panel called Intellex DNA. And this was a Cadillac panel that looked at all kinds of genetic factors that can sometimes guide our treatments. So what do we do? Just quickly, we fix people's basic nutrients. We optimize our nutrition. We gave a lot of mitochondrial support. Mitochondria degenerate with age, and by the time you're 70 years old, you have probably lost 75% of your mitochondria unless you have kept up with exercise and other factors that can stabilize the mitochondria. We gave some nootropic support, which a nootropic is something that just helps the memory and the brain to work better. That is not a foundation of the treatment that I do, but in the beginning, I sometimes will give people supplements that might help their brain to work a little better. But the goal is to get it to work better so that you don't need that. As I mentioned, we optimize the hormones. And then beyond that, the treatment was individualized for each patient, depending on what turned up with the testing. So this is what I really want to get to, the results, because this is, to me, what gives the hope for people. So of our 25 patients, basically 84% of our patients had improvement, and 12% declined, and 4% had no change. So, to contrast that with, let me see, this slide, I just want to contrast what happened in our study compared to one of the Alzheimer's drugs, a controversial drug that just got approved, aducanumab. So on the far right, you can see the green and the positive. This is what happened in our study, the change in cognitive performance. With every other Alzheimer's drug that's been approved, they have been approved if the decline is not as rapid with drug as without drug. And I ran a clinical trials research center for at least 12 years. I've done over 100 clinical trials, but I did 20 long-term trials in Alzheimer's. And I worked with a lot of the drugs that are now on the market. And And, even back then, we had drugs that could wipe out all the amyloid in the brain, but people didn't get better. And so for a drug to get approved for Alzheimer's or for dementia, the decline has to be not as rapid. So you can see on the left in the red is no treatment. There's the decline over a year. Aducanumab was the drug that recently got approved. It doesn't cure people. It just slightly slows things down. And then you can see what happened in our study. So let me just show you some of these specifics. So I mentioned earlier the MoCA, which was the cognitive rating scale, and then the CNS vital signs, which is the whole battery of tests. And you don't have to understand statistics to see that this is a 0 times 0 in month 3, month 6, month 9. And you can see that we had steady improvement in both of these markers. So these were our primary outcome variables that we intended to show improvement. And at each mark that we did it, there was statistical significance. So these were statistically relevant. And so I think, to me, this is the biggest message that I want to say, that the approach that we do with helping people to save their brains, it's not easy. It takes a lot of work in the beginning, a lot of testing and a lot of things that we have to get dialed in, but people became comfortable doing all of this. And I had several patients in my study that went back to work that hadn't been working and were able to go back to work after doing the study. Actually partway through the study. And this is the last thing that I would like to highlight, is what happened. What did we see in the brain MRI? And that was completely unexpected for us. We really didn't expect to see major changes over 9 months. And we worked with a wonderful neuroradiology professor, Dr. Cyrus Raji, who analyzed all this data for us. And the first part is the gray matter. So the brain is composed of gray matter and white matter. And the gray matter is where all your neurons are, and that degenerates with age. And you expect it to degenerate with age. So if you look at the second line here, it says normal controls, I've got to come closer to see the small print, decrease by 0.83 to 0.92% per year. So after a certain age, even with normal aging, your gray matter is going to decrease. But in our study, our patients' gray matter actually increased. And that was a huge surprise to us. And you can see the last line, Alzheimer's patients will decrease by 2.2 to 2.3% per year. So even with normal aging, you're going to decline, but with all of the work that we had people doing in the study, they actually increased their gray matter. So that was a really joyous finding for us. And then we also looked at the hippocampal volume. So I mentioned earlier, the hippocampus is the structure deep in our brain that is what we see degenerate first with dementia, and it also declines with normal aging. And our study patients did decrease, but they decreased a lot less than normal controls decreased, and far less. So our patients decreased to 1.29%. Normal people without dementia decreased 1.4 to 1.7% a year, and with Alzheimer's, people decreased 3.5 to 4.5%. So this, to me, was just hard evidence that what we do is working, right? We're changing people's brains and really improving that and stopping the decline. So that is the end of my slides. And I'm gonna stop this sharing and come back to you and see what kind of questions you have.
Well, of course, this raised a lot of questions, really a lot. So, I mean, I'll start with the very end. When I looked at the decrease in the hippocampus, which you said is normal for all people as we age,
Right.
I got a little greedy. I said, it seemed like it has decreased the least in the group that was doing the test.
Right.
Are there even more rigorous, or if you cranked up some of those factors from the test, which we'll talk about in a second, can we be greedy and say, oh, we can get it so it does not at all decrease?
Yeah, well, I think we would need to carry it out a little longer, right? This was only 9 months. It was a really short trial. We worked fast and furious to move the needle as fast as we could. And so it will be great when there's funding for longer term trials. So if we had done this for 2 years, I think, that would be really an interesting thing to be able to have a longer period of time where we could see something like that, because of course we want to know that these changes endure and that they continue. And I know I did a survey after 6 months with my patients to ask them, oh, how are you doing with your program? Are you keeping up with it? And at that point, a few of the people had not kept up with things. They said, well, I didn't want to do this anymore, and I didn't want to do that anymore. And what I have to tell you is I do see people that when they back off and they pick and choose what they're going to do, and they kind of don't do the whole program, they start backsliding. They don't do as well.
Okay, so a lot of the things that you did in the study seems, and there's no pun intended here, like a no-brainer. Yes. So, I mean, it seems like this is stuff that we all need to do, all of us, never mind, dementia or Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
We need to do it for our well-being, for our health,
Yes.
for the quality of our life. I mean, you mentioned a lot of modalities that you use that almost everybody recommends now, which we know we should do. So, in a way, one of the factors that this study had was there was a layer of discipline imposed upon the patients by the Cadillac treatment. And by the way, I'm sure GM must have founded that study, for you to call it Cadillac, because now it may not be looked upon as such a great, by the way, whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, by having the, individualized people come to the house for you, give you an individualized treatment, look at your cupboards, say, let's do some exercise. No doubt, every single one of us has some procrastination in us. So if you send people to my home every day to make me exercise, to watch what I eat, to put me on a protocol, I will do it. The minute they leave, okay, now it all depends on me. Am I a person with discipline or not? Am I lazy? Is the TV calling and I just want to sit and eat popcorn? So that's true for every person in the world, really, especially as we age. Now, one of the factors in the study was the the ketogenic diet and getting to mild ketosis. Now, keto, as it's called, has become a real popular mode, especially in the weight loss circle.
Right.
But there is more and more study out there that doing only keto all the time may not be good. And there need to be a modified keto or a cycle. Obviously, this was a 9-month study, but can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. We don't really have the data on, the safety or the utility of long-term keto. And what I had my patients do after the study, again, and we just, for the sake of a study, we had everybody in ketosis. And one thing that I will tell you is we noticed that the people that went deeper into ketosis, so you can measure your ketone levels either with a finger stick or a breath analyzer, and the breath analyzers have gotten better, which makes it a lot easier to monitor your ketones. But the people that went deeper into ketosis and had higher levels of ketones, they actually did better. And so that was an interesting thing to us. But it is a restrictive diet. And so after the study, what I encourage my patients to do, first off, some people really notice a difference in ketosis and they wanted to stay there. Like for them, that was a switch that their brain functioned so much better. And other people didn't notice much difference. So So what I advise people to do is to do a modified keto. If they were going to do keto, that they could, have 1 or 2 days a week, that they ate some sweet potatoes and some other variety of foods that, might be higher in carbs that would kick them out of ketosis. But still stay with the general high fat diet, because we know that our brain is fat, right? All that you see the brains and it's this spongy material. Well, that's fat. Cholesterol is fat, and then around each neuron, we have a coating, a myelin sheath that conducts the impulses through the neurons, and that's made of fat. So we need fat. So definitely eating a high level of healthy fats is a good thing for the brain, whether you're in ketosis or not.
Okay, so now the next element, looking at what you guys did for the nutrition,
Yeah.
I believe is a lot less with a question mark attached for the long term.
Right.
You say grain-free, dairy-free, whole foods, organic, paleo type diet. Well, I believe, and again, from my tiny, well, maybe not so tiny, but that is sustainable for life. I mean, that kind of a way to eat. Lots of vegetables, healthy fats, and a little free range meat and chicken, fish. And I assume it's not just lots of vegetable. There could be fruit, especially certain kinds of fruit, right?
Right. Right. And, if you're doing ketosis, you have to watch the fruits and, limit the amounts because they are sugar. But we know that fruits are full of beautiful phytonutrients and antioxidants that help us. So, yes, then you learn, okay, which kind of fruits don't spike your blood sugar. We know that berries are some of the best fruits for that. They have the lowest content. But if you're going to eat mangoes, okay, those are mangoes and pineapples are going to be really high in sugar. So, you might have a bite or two, but not eat a bunch of that. So yes, some fruits could be healthy. And, is this diet sustainable long term? Well, I think you've heard before my own story of developing dementia when I was 50. And this is how I came to learn functional medicine, because I had to close down my clinical trials research center because I could no longer function. And but I luckily had enough brain cells and got help from a lot of people in my learning in the beginning of learning functional medicine to reverse my own dementia. So I will tell you that diet, grain-free, sugar-free, no dairy, no inflammatory foods. I've eaten that way for the past 13 years. And, it's a big shift at first when you give up gluten, but these days there are so many easy options, and we've learned so much more. So I think that's a completely sustainable diet. I think a majority of my patients eat that way.
Right. So if we say keto might be useful for weight loss or for the brain for a time, for 9 months, for 6 months, maybe not for the rest of our lives, but I'm trying to make the information here accessible to everyone listening.
Yeah.
So it seems like in general, grain-free, dairy-free, whole foods, organic, paleo type diet is sustainable for life from what I understand and what I hear. And that does include maybe free range meat, chicken, fish, lots of veggies and healthy fats, right?
Exactly.
Okay, now you add the component of the time restriction. And that's become incredibly popular as well. I'm sure we're going to have an interview about just that facet.
Yeah.
But I've heard the benefit come from various places, including letting the body have time to do a autophagy, to get rid of cells that need to be cleaned out.
Right.
What other benefits do we get from intermittent fasting?
Right. Well, yes, that is certainly a benefit. When you go into a fasted state, then you're going to enhance autophagy and mitophagy, so cleaning out, all of the cells in the mitochondria that are no longer functioning, which then allows for production of healthier cells. So it's long been known in animal studies that when you restrict the calories and the number of calories, the less calories you eat, the longer those animals would live. And, it's been a problem in the American society, right, that our portion sizes have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think it's a huge difference from Europe. Reading the differences, people from Europe come here, they gain weight. People from here go to Europe, they lose weight. Even though they're eating, is, similar types of foods. So portion size is a huge thing. And so restricting the calories into a time window allows the autophagy to happen, and it also reduces the number of calories that people eat. So they're just both, helpful to rejuvenate everything in your body. And that there's nice data showing that those kind of eating styles can also improve people's lipids, their blood sugar, their blood pressure, those kind of things, their waist size. I mean, we know your waist size is a good marker of what's happening metabolically in the body. So, but you mentioned one thing that I want to say, because it is true that in a ketogenic diet, a lot of times people lose weight. And so for many people that's desirable, but not all people. So when we have people that don't need to lose weight and are older, we do have to be really careful with ketosis, and that they don't develop cachexia, where they lose too much weight and they lose muscle. So of course we had people exercising to build up their muscle, and so we worked against muscle loss. But if you are doing a ketogenic diet or modified keto, you have to be sure to be taking in enough of the fats to fuel your body enough and to keep your weight up. So that would be a prohibition against keto. If someone was underweight and started to lose weight, I would not recommend continuing on a ketogenic diet.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this interview. Thank you for joining us today. I know you love what's coming next in part 2. Be sure to click the subscribe button for more videos.